Guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's top 10 Kickstarters of the month. And before I get started, I do have a couple of friends who have Kickstarters, and also a few Kickstarters of my own. First up, Slice of Life. It's about an anime character comes to life and falls in love with a high school cheerleader. This is our one-shot of that series. It's actually very new reader friendly about our characters going into different animes, some of your favorites like Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, Power Rangers, and so many other titles that we reference. So go check that one out. We also have Enamel Pins from our other series as well, our superhero book Like Father Like Daughter, our horror book Haunting, and then also our not safe for work book Beast and Snow. So you got some Snow White in there, werewolves, superheroes, super dad pin. So hopefully you guys could go check that out too. It's very close to being funded, and we have a few more days left of that. Now let's get into my friends who have a couple of Kickstarters. So first up is Nightwolf issue 8. You know, one thing I love to see on Kickstarter is ongoing books of franchises, because you don't get to see it as often. A lot of times there's miniseries or anthologies or things that you just see issue 1 from and maybe you don't get a continuation of it. So to see something going on for so long, seeing a saga continue like Nightwolf and having this fan base really built, it's so fun to watch. And to see where the mythology is going as well. Moving on to Becca Boo issue 2. These are two of some of my favorite people in comics. We got Garth, who has worked on Witch Creek Road, and also his art partner, Keenan, who also worked on Witch Creek Road, and they're doing a not safe for work fun title with Becca Boo. Moving on to Bloom Pretty Forget Me Not is a kind of fun requel, I guess you'll call it, where you get to see the two leads of the original Bloom Pretty issue 1. They have a daughter now, and we get to see her adventures in this series. Same creative team. It's also a mature, not safe for work book where there's magic, fantasy, very Game of Thrones style with some gorgeous artwork. Actually, the current artist on Spider-Woman is working on this title right now. Moving on to Sex Spells, issue 1, which is another not safe for work book. This is actually the artist who worked on Beast and Snow is contributing to this book, and a couple of great writers. It's actually attached to Bad Bug, who also creates some wonderful, mature, not safe for work titles. And this has a sci-fi spin, so if you're looking for like aliens with wonderful art, go check that out. And last but not least, we got Nightmare Theater 3D. This is the final chapter of Nightmare Theater, which is a horror anthology. If you're a fan of horror, this is a must watch and a must read. We're actually part of the second volume of this book, and it was so fun to be a part of it and have our creative juices kind of flow through, especially for me, who doesn't always have the chance to write horror and always wants the chance to write horror as just a horror fan. So let's actually move into the top 10. Number 10 for me is S.P.I.R.I.T issue 3. This is a fun, all-ages book where we get to see some queer characters as well and a group of teens solving mysteries. So if you like the Nancy Drews of them all, go check this out with really cool kind of webtoon-styled artwork. Actually, the artist who worked on that did the cover for By Visibility issue 1, our anthology from a few years ago. Speaking of anthologies, number 9 is Becoming Who We Are, Real Stories About Growing Up Trans. And this is a really cool angle because we get to obviously see trans stories, but also get to see kid trans stories and that reflection. And it's honestly something I haven't really seen. So I honestly think it's a really important book, and I hope you guys go support it. Moving on to number 8, which is Wolfsbane, the Silver Bullet edition. This is a rocket ship book who does tend to do the webtoon web series comics, and that's exactly this, where we get to see two direct market comic creators go into this space and do webtoon. And what I love about Kickstarter, especially Kickstarters with webtoons, is to find a whole different audience, right? Webtoon, you have a lot of the free readers there, and you're like, okay, can they actually also see that webtoon is just comic books and see that in a different form, a physical form, through the funding of Kickstarter? And I just think it's a wonderful bridge to get different types of people to read comic books. Moving on to number 7, which is The Fox Came from the Woods issue 2, and really the style of art grabbed me for this one. The thumbnail looked dark but also cartoony all at the same time, had a really interesting style, but then the interior artwork is also very manga, so if you enjoy manga storytelling, this one might be for you, especially if you like horror stories as well. Moving on to number 6, which is Intrusive Thoughts issue 2. This has to do with a sleep paralysis demon coming to life. It definitely talks about the intrusive thought of them all and killing their classmates. So it's a mystery. It's definitely a horror as well. You gotta have this slasher within, and it's just a really cool angle on horror that I haven't seen that I think works really perfectly for a comic book, especially kind of teen-driven comic book. Moving on to number 5, which is the Adept Assassin G, Immortal Swordsmen in Sheng. This is another installment from Immortal Studios, who does a lot of martial arts comic books and have done a lot of wonderful series, and said, hey, how about if we did the next installment of all our series in one Kickstarter, which is something you don't really get to see very often, but it's also kind of cool to see a publisher do something different on Kickstarter and kind of bring their different audiences together to support this one Kickstarter with some wonderful martial arts comic book titles. Moving on to number 4, which is Hell Her Way issue 1. This is a not safe for work book, which had a really cool spin. It's about Satan, who says, you know what, I'm depressed and I want to make hell a good place. So it's just had a really interesting twist. The artwork looked really nice, and it's just something I hadn't really seen, but it feels so obvious to do. So very curious to see where that one's gonna go. Moving on to number 3, which is Rise, a superhero drama in Subversion of the hero's journey. That's all topics that I really enjoy. It's just about this regular dude who becomes a hero, but again, you kind of put the superhero tropes on its head. I'm such a big fan of that as someone who's been reading superhero comics all her life. I want to see kind of something different in a different voice, especially on Kickstarter, where you don't get to see many superhero books. It's interesting because it's very mainstream. It's very something you see in the direct market. On Kickstarter, you could do something so different with this genre. Moving on to number 2, which is the Wild Cosmos issues 1 through 3. This is the same creator who did Beastlands, I believe it's called, and I love the art for that book, and it eventually also went to the direct market and became not just a webtoon comic, a Kickstarter comic book, and now we're getting to see a whole nother series from them, and the artwork is still splendid, and again, a really interesting twist where we get to see this space smuggler have to capture a magical girl. So you have the sci-fi Ben with the magical girl Ben, and you're putting those genres together in a really interesting intersection. Moving on to number 1, which is, I think, a pretty obvious campaign for this month, and that is the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers The Return. This is such a huge campaign, and I really like when big publishers are able to have new material on Kickstarter, because a lot of times the big publishers are just are using Kickstarter more for collections, things that have been published like 20 years ago. But now we're getting to see, hey, we can actually do new comics and blend the direct market together with Kickstarter. So we're getting to see a whole graphic novel that you'll eventually get with the Mighty Morphin book, but eventually also in a few months you're going to get the single issues. So you're seeing all these different audiences that could come together to get this comic. And also Amy Jo Johnson, who was the original Power Ranger, Pink Power Ranger, is writing this. So there's just so many different layers to get people into comics, get people into Kickstarter, and I just think that's the most important tool in general, especially for Kickstarter. So and also as a Power Rangers fan, I'm just really stoked. The Pink Power Ranger is a very important character to me. It was really one of the first heroes on television that I got to see, wow, a female lead that kind of can hold her own. Eventually, by the end, kind of becomes the leader, or at least one of the leaders of the group, and has more of a voice. Love the character. I think she's very important in the superhero narrative, and I want to see where her story goes from the vision of the person who played her. So very excited. And also Nico Leon, who did a lot of Miss Marvel, and Spider-Gwen is another artist I really like that I think fits perfectly for this. So that is number 1. Let me know in the comments below, what are the Kickstarters you're most looking forward to, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.